Welcome to the podcast, Leading Change. I'm your host, Adam Christie. We have a real treat for you today. Our guest does it all. He's a singer, arranger, composer, producer, teacher, and director. He has arranged over 2,000 songs for some of the world's best ensembles. Among his many accolades, he was a producer on the show The Sing-Off on NBC, which produced the great group The Pentatonics. He also was the music director and arranger for the very popular Pitch Perfect movies. He can be found on DekeSharon.com. I encourage you to follow him on all of his social media, including Instagram, Facebook, and his Twitter, which is @DekeSharon. We brought him on to talk about his unique perspective on politics a couple of days after the U.S. election. Ladies and gentlemen, the legend, Mr. Deke Sharon.
It is my pleasure. Just call me Deke. And I'm, for anybody who's listening, I am, just so they know, I'm not myself actively politically conservative. I definitely lean toward the progressive side of things. I live in San Francisco, California, and I was born and raised here, but I'm not registered with the Democratic Party either. I'm an independent, and I like to think of myself as always seeking the truth, regardless of the circumstance. And then what's the best way for us to move forward as a people, as a nation, as a country. And my life's work is to spread harmony through harmony. I believe very much that we have much more in common than we have different. And vocal harmony is a great way to get people from different backgrounds, different races, different classes, different parts of the world to come together. And when they sing together, they realize the commonality, the bonds that they have, and the humanity that they share is far more powerful than any specific differences. It's a very powerful tool for social adhesion. And this is a time when our country is as divided as it's been since the Civil War, I think. I mean, I really do think that we've got serious, stark lines drawn, and I'm doing what I can to erase them.
By being on here, I think it does a huge service to that. Let me ask you, how would you describe the assault conservatives feel from being in the music, education, composing, arranging world? From what I understand, they feel like they can't share that they're conservative, like they'll be attacked. Mm-hmm. Can you describe that?
Yes. And I think that it's probably somewhat akin to being like staunchly liberal and being in a much more conservative field. I don't know, construction, police work. I don't want to label or typify too much, but I don't think the situation is merely that it's difficult for conservatives to be in a largely artistic field. I think it's difficult for people of one political bent to be in a situation where in their career they're surrounded primarily with people from a different political viewpoint. And so I do have friends who are conservative, and they speak to me candidly, and they actually know they can speak to me candidly. But one of the main things they say is they know that they cannot speak openly in our community because they will be perhaps not ostracized by everyone, but definitely distanced, not invited as often, not looked to for choices and options, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a real shame. I think it's a shame that anybody would feel that they wouldn't be able to speak their mind. And I think we should talk more about that, about the dangers of an illiberal culture in which honesty and communication is not held as the highest standard. And I think it's also unfortunate that there are people who actively think the correct way to bring about social change is to silence voices.
Where do you think it went wrong, Deke? When did this really start to get really bad?
Okay. Yeah, we got to go back a bit. I'm 52 years old, and I think it really started with the deregulation of the media, which happened during the Reagan era, best I understand. And I remember these days. And I think it was well-meaning, and I appreciate the desire to unfetter political speech in general, and to allow anybody from any perspective to be able to jump on the airwaves and share what they believe. However, there are some specific challenges with it. Before, when there were 3 networks and there were these newsrooms that were being run by the networks at a loss, there was kind of a high bar that had to be cleared before anything could be shared. There was a lot of time and energy that went into researching things. And so by the time different viewpoints got spread and shared, they'd been vetted. So you didn't get a lot of conspiracy fringe theories. And you also had to give some time if there was a legitimate counter argument. And I remember watching public television saying, like, and here's the counter argument. The idea of sharing the airwaves and trying to disseminate information rather than specifically spread polemic and try to change minds. Now, that's always been the case. There's always been strong political viewpoint infused, and nobody is complete without bias. But that was the first terrible step. Step number 2 was the 24-hour news cycle. So as soon as we got CNN on the air, and again, it's a compound effect. So then they need to constantly generate news, and the whole idea that something is news is the bar is lowered because they got to come up with something else to put in there, right? Then we have the problem of the for-profit media, right? Before, like I said, the networks, they ran their newsrooms at a loss. But all of a sudden, you've got news organizations that need to generate income specifically around the news. So, and the movie Network brings this up in the 70s, right? And the whole line, if it bleeds, it leads, right? So things were already going in a bad direction because people were trying to capture eyeballs and get better ratings. But this got weaponized, I think, as more and more news sources were stepping into the fray to try to get people's attention, and it just lowered and lowered the discourse. Plus, it's been said by many a media expert that the way in which we digest media is far more intellectual, thoughtful, and has many more pauses in it when we read it than when we watch video, which actually can overwhelm us. And this can be done to powerful effect, but it also very much can be done to confuse and stymie our ability to logically think, because specifically the core emotions of fear and anger down in our medulla oblongata, the base of our brain, will overtake us. And frankly, it's those emotions that are so powerful in getting some kind of political statement or some kind of media statement to go viral, which is now the next problem, the internet, where we end up having a constant place where anybody can say anything. And in fact, on these platforms like Facebook and Twitter, an outlandish statement or a powerful statement that causes outrage is far more sticky, and it's far more powerfully spread. And this is both information and disinformation. Facebook doesn't fundamentally care if something's true via their algorithm, although they seem to slowly be putting their toe in that water. They care if it's getting views and eyeballs and clicks. So political speech and statements become shorter, and sound bites already were king by the time Reagan was president. But now it's gone further and further downfield, where people are looking for visual media and they're looking for ways in which to create and spark outrage. And it's been a growing problem, I think, on both sides of the political divide. And then we get Russia stepping into the situation, and it's been shown that they were actively trying to sow dissent within America on both sides of the political field, although what I've read, they found more success on the fringe right than on the fringe left. And there are different reasons for this we can talk about. But ultimately, there was active dissemination of false information in America to try to make Americans hate each other and think that America is the problem, that 50% of America is the problem, to where now my understanding is that polls have come out to show that half of Americans, some on the left, some on the right, think that other half of Americans are evil. This is a truly problematic situation for us to be in when we are in a democracy. And my apologies to anyone if you're still listening here. This was a long bit of a diatribe, but I do think that it was a growing arms race, as it were, and a series of steps that have taken us down this very unfortunate path that I hope we're able to reverse ourselves from. And the fact that few people are reading. Most of the people are getting their information through a combination of video and flashy media and all that, as opposed to sitting down and reading a long, thoughtful
Hmm.
article is definitely a big piece of this.
Now, was it always, because before there was, I mean, like in the Reagan eras, there was CNN, ABC, CBS. What happened when Fox News entered the fray?
I hope that I'm not saying these things with too much bias in my voice, but obviously, like I said, you're talking to somebody who is generally politically more progressive, and I believe that Fox News started to blur the line between actual reporting and commentary, and I think they did it intentionally. They said, okay, the motto was fair and balanced, and it's still the case today, where their daytime programming is designed to be and is considered for legal reasons to be news reporting. However, once they get into the evening hour and they're talking about, uh, you've got the pundits on, you've got the opinion shows and all that kind of stuff. This is actually technically considered entertainment. And that's the way it's seen by the FCC. That's the way it's categorized. And it allows them a much wider swath, an ability to say things that are not necessarily true and to not be held to task.
So, are you talking about the Tucker Carlson thing?
Absolutely. And he's not the only person. And I also don't want to create a situation where I say that there's nobody on the left who's also exaggerating circumstances and things. Although, from my perspective, there has been more that has happened politically on the right. There's a higher level of disinformation out there, and the QAnons and the Pizzagates and these kind of pernicious beliefs throughout a swath of the far right. This is not all people who are conservative. Believe me, most people do not believe that Hillary Clinton was running a pedophile ring out of a pizza joint. No, they do not believe that. And I'm embarrassed that you even have to put that out there. There are significant problems on the far left, which I would like to also bring up and talk about, but I think they have less to do with a kind of disinformation and more to do with a problematic approach to what they see as forwarding social justice.
Let's go to the left.
Sure.
What do you see as their big issues?
Let me start by saying that the fundamental focus of the left, even the far left, is justice. And they are looking at a society and a culture in which injustice has been baked into the sauce, and I agree with them. I agree entirely that systemic racism is still a problem in America. And I get that some people say, like, look, we had a black president. There are a lot of people who are white who are unemployed. I have a lot of friends who are of color, and they are very successful. And it really feels to me like racism isn't there. But when you look at the fact that the average family of color, the average black family, has maybe only a couple dollars, $5 worth of wealth for every $100 that a white family has. The fact that the property they own over generations has been in black neighborhoods, which were actively redlined. And so their property values are lower, and they have much less wealth built up in their families, and they don't have the ability to give as many opportunities and to help their kids. And of course, then there's affirmative action, which has been and was very beneficial, certainly in the early days, in trying to right these scales. But there are also challenges that get complex. And, I live in San Francisco, where you've got a huge Asian community, and there are a lot of people who are Asian who are filling up the best schools, as it were, based entirely on test scores. And then there are people who are white who are saying, hey, wait, this isn't fair. So then what should we do? Should we have quotas for race? Is that the right thing to do? Should we do it entirely on test scores? Is that so? It's the problems are still here, and we're still grappling and wrestling with them. And what the far left is trying to do is to create a just world by forcing the hand of people who have racist views, racist actions, and systems that are in place that are sexist, that are homophobic, that are fundamentally problematic to social justice. I get that. I'm completely on board with the goal, and I'm completely on board with the fact that there is a problem, because there
However,
is absolutely a problem. However, and here's the big however, I think that cancel culture is an incredibly toxic and dangerous black mark, like dangerous negative check on the far left, check mark in their weapons and their tools. Now, I get what they're trying to do. What they're trying to do is say, okay, we don't want to burn down buildings. We don't want to go and set bombs and blow things up. What we're going to try to do is we're going to try to change the culture and the dialogue around things. And if somebody says something that's problematic, we're going to call them out and hold them to task. You have said something wrong. This is wrong. Let me point it out. However, it's gotten to the point where it's weaponized. And I personally even experienced this in my own Facebook discussions and own conversations with friends and colleagues. And like I said, like I'm coming at this from the left. And not only will I have people from on the right, disagree with me and say things, but honestly, the strongest attacks that I get, the people who literally will say, like, this is vile, disgusting speech, I'm deeply disappointed in who you are as a person. I really thought you were a better human being. Like this kind of stuff comes at me, like, and we probably agree on 95% of whatever. One example that I could bring up, and I'm not that familiar with the specific details of it, only the broad strokes, is J.K. Rowling, who was a very active and vocal advocate for women's rights, for social justice, for progressive issues, anti-Donald Trump, didn't mind speaking out, would speak her piece. And she made some statements about trans women where she felt like she said, but there still need to be some spaces in which women who aren't trans women are protected. And I think she had some experiences in her life that involved abuse or whatnot. Again, like I'm painting with really broad strokes, and I'm sure I'm getting some of this wrong. But bottom line, she made some statements, and there were people who said, like, you are very transphobic. Your statements are horrible. I'm no longer supporting you. And basically you are canceled. I will no longer read Harry Potter. I won't, share any of these stories. It's an unfortunate thing that your work has been permanently tainted by these statements you've made. And there are just so many reasons that this is problematic. Number one, it's possible to separate the art from the artist. Okay. And I think we look at this further away. We can talk about Wagner, who was supportive of Nazis and stuff like that. It doesn't mean his operas weren't beautiful and his songwriters weren't beautiful. He's still like horrible, contemptible, don't get me wrong. And frankly, you go far enough back in history and everybody's got some kind of a problem when you look at it, politically, sexism, racism, blah, 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 blah. So it's a can of worms that basically you're not going to be able to read anybody's literature. You're not going to, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, like we're talking about these people who built the freedoms upon which we now rely as Americans, and yet they were slaveholders. So there was this deep dichotomy within the nature of who they were. Okay, so that's problem number one. Problem number two, these people mostly agree with J.K. Rowling. Like, okay, let's say you agree with someone 95%, 98%, but they do this 2% thing and you disagree with that 2% thing. You're going to literally throw them under the bus. It's like left on left violence. Like, what are you going to call? Like, you're going to rip their heart out and stomp on it and try to destroy their career. And there have been people whose careers, and they've said like they've lost their jobs or whatever because of statements that have been made, and the fact they've been called out because they thought certain things or they had certain beliefs or whatever. This is pernicious 1984 thought police stuff. And in a political country, a democracy in which we need to be able to speak our truth, to be able to find the hard answers to the hard solutions, because the easy stuff's already been solved. We can't silence people. And I'll end with the fact that when reading a great article in The Economist, and I tend to get most of my news, both specifically in print and from foreign news sources like the BBC and The Economist and whatnot, because I really like the fact that they distance themselves enough from American, the muck of it, as it were, so that you get kind of a clearer perspective on it all. They quoted in one article about the fact that think it was a Cato Institute study that basically said only the far left in American political and general discourse feels completely free to say whatever they want. Everyone else, from like the center left to like just the left, all the way through everyone on the right, feels as though they are not able to speak freely because of the potential pernicious repercussions that would face them and that could affect their jobs, that could affect their livelihoods, beyond even just friendships. Um, yeah, and sorry for speaking so long,
no,
but that's a problem.
Yes, it is. It is interesting to me too that you have, we say the left, there's the extreme left and the extreme right, and they just keep going. There is no end. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think maybe there is an end to these left and rights, and then there's everything beyond that that doesn't qualify, but somehow we say that it is right. Like, if some people would say to go far enough right, well, now you have the KKK and stuff like that. It's like,
absolutely.
No, I'm pretty sure
fascism and like, no, this is horrible, but you go all the way to the far left and you end up with like communism and or like a repressive socialist state. Now, I think there are also successful socialist states, the social democratic, governments that are in Northern Europe or whatever, which have free speech and have a larger social safety net than we do here in America. And frankly, they rate higher annually on their happiness scales, and their people, they have less freedom, like when it comes to how much money they make in their taxes, but also the people there. And I have a lot of friends, I travel the world all the time. I have a lot of friends who live there, and they're like, it's nice. So the word socialism, frankly, has been weaponized to some extent by the right and not being able to differentiate between these different things. And so that's problematic as well, because, and I think Bernie Sanders was a politician who was both bringing dialogue and light and perspective to his political views, but at the same time was dismissed because people likened him to Castro or something like that. And there's a pretty wide gulf, between Norway and Cuba, for instance.
You think he should have ran as a Democrat? You think him admitting, being so honest that he was a democratic socialist, you think that really cost him in going further in politics?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And I think if we look at the political landscape right now and the results, the fact that Biden barely squeaked through, and there were more people who voted for Trump in every category, right? Black women, Black men, Latinos, Latina, like every category, there were more people who voted for Trump. And in fact, I have a lot of friends who are conservative who hated Trump. And in fact, they voted against him in the first election, but the second time they voted for him, and they were like, we hate Trump, but we're even more afraid of the far left and the belief that Biden is some kind of a Trojan horse, and that he'll not make it through all 4 years, or he'll have a cabinet and they'll be the people calling the shots. Like, frankly, was the case with George W. Bush, who, had a much stronger vice president and a cabinet that made a lot of decisions for him or on his behalf, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not an impossible scenario. But that fear for them was worse than, like the lesser of two evils, the devil in their hand, which to people on the left, of course, is like, but how could there be anything worse than Trump? So this is why I think our political landscape is really problematic, because there are a lot of people that I talk to and know on the left who say, if you voted for Trump, you're a racist, because he's racist and you've heard his racist rhetoric. And I'll tell you, like, I don't think there's any question. I think the man, like, active dog whistles, and I think there's a measure of racism in what he has said. And I think it's just fundamental to who he is. But I think everybody has some racism in them. So I'm not excusing it, but the little song from Avenue Q, everyone's a little bit racist sometimes. Like, yeah, like I grew up with 70s cop shows, and the bad guys are the black people. Like, yeah, there is some of this stuff hardwired in all of us, and we need to untangle it and do that work. And I'm actively trying to do that work, but I also don't want to pretend like there's not a piece of it in the American psyche. So but all of this is to say, right now, to be on the right or to be on the left and to even try to talk to people on the other side. How dare you vote for Trump or think that that is a better situation than Biden? And then people on the right who are like, I got to tell you, I think that we're like on the cusp of some kind of pernicious socialism that is going to destroy the core and the fabric of American life. And Biden is like actively senile, and he's going to have this whole cabinet who are going to come and just tear apart our liberties and our freedoms, and they just can't even talk to each other. And this is where I think that the lack of freedom to state one's viewpoints without reprisal makes the overall situation much worse.
Do you think this is, when you're making music with people, the truest music, the best music is based off of vulnerability. But in this world where you get attacked for who you are, or what you believe,
not by everyone, but by some people, yes, right. Absolutely.
Do you think that it is impacting music making?
Well, probably. And like I said, my life's work is to spread harmony through harmony and to try to create connections and build commonalities that allow people to see past the difficulties that are presented to us and the false dichotomy between right and left. Because like I said, the actual political spectrum is a giant three-dimensional map of dots, and it's just a messy cloud of different perspectives and beliefs and positions and ideologies. And the fact is, almost all Americans just want life to be better for everyone. I'm not saying everybody, because there are some people out there who are malicious, malignant, sociopathic, whatever. But the vast majority of people on this planet just want to live and let live and want a better life for everybody else, right or left. But let me give an example, because I was mentioning affirmative action beforehand. I think it's reasonable to believe that affirmative action is the best or one of the most effective tools to creating a more racially balanced landscape in schools or whatever. I also think it's reasonable to believe that affirmative action is undermining that goal. And it's time now to pull it out because of a number of reasons you can read all about online, people in pro and con, all that kind of stuff. However, if belief systems become weaponized to the point where somebody of color thinks that, well, if you don't vote for affirmative action, you're against Black people, right? Then you end up with a really bad situation, because somebody else then can't come and say like, well, I actually, listen, I have a lot of friends of color. I want you to succeed. I think this is great, but I think societally that's actually going to send the wrong message and create more problems than it helps, right? For whatever reason. Maybe you're a libertarian, you think there should be fewer rules. Maybe you have experienced and seen how it ends up causing more resentment. Or maybe you live in San Francisco and the school and your particular school is that's merit-based, is having a larger and larger Asian population, and there's actually less diversity, with it, without it, whatever. So you end up with the situation in which political viewpoints make people feel as though they are being judged, and then other people feel as though they're being victimized, and then you have that disconnect. And hopefully we're able to get to a point where, in a place where people are able to share their viewpoint and not make it so charged. But I do see people on the left saying like, if you voted for Trump, unfriend me. Like if you did X, then you're clearly a racist and can't be my friend, et cetera, et cetera.
So,
and I don't actually think that's true.
That going back to the cancel culture,
I think these kind of dialogues and conversations are going on all the time, and it gets complicated, right? All of this new information comes out about Michael Jackson, and then there are questions like, there are a lot of people who are convinced that he abused children in a serial way over the course of his life and caused a lot of people's pain. So then should his music be listened to? Should it be performed? Should it be shared? Where do you come down on this whole thing? It's complicated. and he's no longer around to be able to support and defend himself. But at the same time, there's a lot of information out there, both sides, and he had plenty of time to make his case, and his case is out there, and there are other people still, fighting on his behalf. Okay, so you got all that kind of stuff. But let's say it's definitely true, and it's unequivocal, and that he had done all these horrible things. I think it's reasonable for someone to say, okay, no more. Like, you are now persona non grata as far as our music department is concerned, or whatever, out of respect for children and et cetera, and abuse, survivors. So, but I think that stuff was always there. Like, I don't think that it was never the case that you couldn't, pull the plug on, like, wow, this person has actually turned out to be pretty horrible. We're not going to, share this piece of literature anymore. But on the flip side, it's like, yes, there is racism. In fact, it's at the core of the book Huck Finn. But do we not teach it? Like, you know, is it too triggering, or is it actually valuable that somebody spends some time interacting with and seeing the N word, so they realize, like, the like constants of it in American life at that time, to really bring themselves into that culture and realize that the most sympathetic character in that entire book, and the person who is the most wonderful and human, is Jim, in fact, who's on the receiving end of all of this. Um, yeah, it's difficult. It's challenging, and there are also, when you're dealing with the trans issue, I think, like the J.K. Rowling situation brings up, there are other thoughts and perspectives. And one last thing I'll say about this is, our culture's been moving really quickly on a lot of stuff. If you go back just 20 years, the idea of gay marriage, for instance, is so, like, unthinkable in our culture, like, as something that's going to happen. And now there have been so many wonderful social changes, and boom, 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 boom down the line. Like, there's been a lot of positive social motion and momentum, that I think for some people is a little unstabilizing, and it's taking them a little time to catch up, I think, with where we are, and that's okay too. Like, you know,
Personally, I don't think we're moving fast enough, but that's my issue.
I agree with you completely, and I'm out here on the West Coast, and we're trying really hard um, through music and culture, and, like, through my life's work, to build those bridges and to humanize people who are different, so that not just boxes that have been checked already, but further boxes, so it's okay for people to be themselves. But
Hmm.
in a liberal culture, it has to be okay for everyone to be themselves. So it should be okay to be a trans man or woman, and nobody holds anything against you. At the same time, it should be okay to be conservative and to believe that it is good to have fewer taxes, or it's best to not have as many laws around this, or regulations. Like, even if I disagree with the person, it's like, I'll defend to the death their right to have those opinions, because that's what we need. We need dialogue. We need open discourse. We need communication to be able to get to the deeper truths. And the worst thing that we can possibly have are things that we can't discuss. In fact, the situation in France, that happened recently, with the beheading of an English teacher who showed the cartoons of Muhammad that were in the Charlie Hebdo, kind of their equivalent of the Onion, right? Their Mad magazine, that had
Hmm.
political cartoons about all different religions. It was like the religion issue. And of course, a few years ago, a gunman came in and pretty much killed everybody who was in there.
Hmm.
But very recently, this English teacher showed this to this class, and before he did it, he said, "Please turn away. This may be offensive to some people. If you don't want to see it, turn your head." And then it was the father of a girl who wasn't even in the class that day who heard about this, shared this news somewhere online. Somebody else came, some jihadist, and beheaded this teacher. Um, and the great article in The Economist basically said, uh, nobody has a right to not be offended. And that's exactly right. Nobody has a right to not be offended. We need to be able to have communication and discourse that allows for everyone's viewpoint, even viewpoints that you think are um, wrong or disgusting or offensive, because the only way to combat those is more light, more communication. Here's the thing, that's why this perspective is wrong. But, and this is a concept from marriage counseling and therapy, this is a concept from interpersonal work. We have to identify the concept and the thought and the idea as separate from the individual. And this is where our country's getting it wrong, right? The people on the right and the people on the left aren't the problem. Maybe their ideas are, but why don't we take those ideas and we put them outside of ourselves? And let's talk about and discuss this idea as a third thing. And the two of us can go at it. Or let's look at this problem. You're not the problem. This is the problem. You think the best way to come at it is from this side. We think it's from that side. Let's get together and try to figure out where's our commonality, because there's usually going to be a lot of common ground. And then let's find a way that we can tackle this problem together, right? That's really at the key of all this. And you can't do it without communication.
So we would like to thank you for coming, Deke, and for talking with us. Where can people connect with you at?
It has been my pleasure. Probably the easiest place is to find me online, dekesharon.com. That's DEKESHARON.com. And you can find me on Deke Sharon on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, blah, 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 if you prefer any of those social media platforms. But I'm an easy person to find, easy person to get in touch with.
And what would you like to leave the audience with? What's one thing you would like to leave the audience with in this time?
It's the concept that none of us have all of the answers. And this idea that we're so certain that we know what's best is usually changed as soon as we get more understanding and perspective from others. So the most powerful thing that we can do when we're having a conversation is, first of all, allow people to feel safe and comfortable in talking to us and let them know that you're not going to destroy their livelihood when we're having this conversation. And moreover, start by listening, because as soon as you get that other information that someone else has, usually your sum total of information is much greater, and it helps you achieve a higher level of understanding. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to agree on everything all of the time. That's absolutely the case. However, I think there would be much more respect, much more commonality, and much more harmony in American culture if we did that. And that is absolutely what we need right now. I'm hoping that over the next several years, we will be able to knit back together the fabric of American culture and recognize that, frankly, our states aren't blue and red. They're all purple, right? And so let's all just enjoy our purpleness and do what we can working together to make this world a better place.
Thanks so much for being with us. And thank you, Deke, for your time and message. You can also catch bonus material from Deke's interview on our website, www.leadingchangepodcast.com, or on YouTube. We call this bonus content the curtain call. And this curtain call is a time where we just relax, ask some fun questions, and by the end of it, you really feel like you know our guest. And you can see that, again, at www.leadingchangepodcast.com. Catch us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and all major podcasting platforms. My name is Adam Christie, and we'll catch you on our next episode on the podcast Leading Change.